Jimmy Kim, originally from the DC area, but now in Atlanta. Korean American background, and have served in small church settings in the Asian American context, but then also at my current church, which is Perimeter Church, which is a large, frankly, it's a mega church outside of the suburbs, in the suburbs of Atlanta, predominantly white, very affluent, very much like Park Cities in a lot of ways. And so all that to say, I've seen the gamut of what family ministry could look like from traditional, well, we'll use air quotes here, traditional, children's and student ministries, college ministry, and then into adult ministry, to what we try to employ and practice at Perimeter, which is what we would call family ministry. So a lot of my experience, I'm going to try to draw as much as possible from those shared experiences of smaller and larger, but you're going to see a lot of what I'm going to talk about is contextualizing this content into your setting, right? I say this a lot of times to our parents about their kids, like, people want good curriculum, they want good content, and I tell parents, like, hey, this content is only so good, but you have to help us take it to their heart, right? Like the parents are always going to know their own kids the best versus any other person on staff at the church. Now, yes, I understand, like when you get to like older ages, kids may share less at home and share more with like their youth pastor or their counselor or whoever else, like a youth volunteer, youth leader. So obviously, you know what I'm saying. It's broad. You guys are practitioners. You know the challenges involved with youth ministry, children's ministry, family ministry. So we're going to talk about communicating the importance of family ministry. The handout that you received, and I know that some of you just walked in here. I think we ran out of handouts. Get in touch with me afterward, and I'll find a way to get you a PDF of that to your email. It is really a workshop that Cam Cole gave, I think, 2 or 3 years ago about how to start a family ministry and the argument for a family ministry. And it's going to be a great, great resource for you. And if you have access, I don't know if they have this posted somewhere on the Rooted YouTube page, but a disclaimer and a shout out for the Rooted YouTube page. If you can find Cam's talk on that topic, you will probably get more nuts and bolts of family ministry from that talk than you will this one, if that makes sense. And then I may have already lost some of you. You won't offend me if you decide to leave. All right, I'm going to try to make this a little bit more specific to us. So if you've ever used Slido or something, anything like it, you can pull out your phone. You can join the Slido. I'd love to hear where you guys are or who you guys are and how your familiarity also with family ministry, because I don't want to assume that we're all on the same page or we're all coming from the same place in ministry. So you can take a picture of that QR code or navigate to slido.com and then punch in that code, and then you can put in a little vote there. So thank you to that first person. One of one, yeah. All right, so here we go. We got a couple more coming in. I'll give you a second to do that. I am curious because some of what I am going to talk about is how to communicate with your senior pastor or your senior leadership. So I want to see if they're, okay, that we've got 25% of the room that are in that role. So this is going to be exciting. And I know some of you are probably both. You might have an additional one here. Maybe you're a parent or you occupy some other role. Another minute here. So just pick whatever you most, kind of identify with in this place as a practitioner of family ministry or wanting to learn about family ministry. Okay, so about half the room, youth pastor or youth leader, about half the room, or more or less, a third of the room in one of these two areas. So that's great. That's helpful for me to know. Now let's move on to the next one. Keep your phones open. Next question is this, and your phone should already update. If not, refresh that page. How familiar are you with family ministry? Right? And if you're not at all familiar, then just put 0, right? But if you're like, we're doing this, we're killing it at our church or in our context, put a 5, and then I'll give you the microphone and let you take it over from here. All right, this is great. This is helpful for me to see. Hopefully it's helpful for you also, kind of like size up the rest of the room here. Okay, we're all coming from a place where like, okay, I kind of know what it is, but I also kind of don't know what it is. Let's learn some more. That's why we're here. All right, so Okay, then maybe what I'll do is take a little bit more time on the emphasis of the what and the why of family ministry, and then I hope to give you a handful of practical tools to go about implementing family ministry and communicating, really, the importance of family ministry. All right, so fantastic. We'll go back to that for Q&A at the very end. I know some of you guys maybe not want to ask your questions out loud, and you can kind of punch in a question in there when I open up that slide. So what is family ministry? Obviously, we take this from Scripture. Here at Rooted, we believe in being Bible saturated, right? And you are likely familiar with these verses. Maybe not right off the top of your head, but you know this, right? Deuteronomy 6:7 is coming out of the great Shema, right? This is when they're, Moses and the Israelites are headed toward the promised land, re-giving of the law, right? And then he says, "Hear, O Israel, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, strength, and mind." And then he goes on to say, "You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise." Effectively, what he's saying is you are raising up, you're spiritually forming your children, right, that are a part of your household. And how do you do this? When you live ordinary life, when you sit down, when you walk, when you lie down, when you rise, right? Proverbs 22:6, another familiar verse. "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it." Right? Now, I think as good Bible interpreters, we're not holding God accountable to this. I did all the right things, God, and now you have to do your part, right? Hopefully you heard what John was talking about this morning. And, this is a kind of a general rule of life. Right? Let's do our best to train up our children in the way of the Lord. I love also Psalm 139 talks about, "Search my heart, O God. See if there's any grievous way in me, lest I be led off of the way of everlasting life." Right? That's our desire, is for our families and our children, right, to walk in the ways of the Lord. In Proverbs 22:6, great reminder for us who have spiritual oversight and care for our children. And then Ephesians 6:1-4, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline of the Lord," or in instruction of the Lord. And I love this verse here because there's an emphasis on the type of obedience that children are to give to their mothers and fathers. What's the modifier? The modifier is in the Lord, obey. Right? So it's not just a listen to mom and dad, take out the trash when I tell you to take out the trash the first time. That's not the kind of obedience that we're talking about here. And you can see the correlation between these three passages. It's more about the spiritual formation and health, right? How are we raising them up in the instruction of the Lord? Not to follow mom and dad's rules, but to follow the way of God. Obedience to God, a life of faithfulness to him. That's our goal. Not submissive children, right? We're not trying to create families where we have a bunch of little mini-me's roaming around that are just doing whatever mom and dad tells them, or their youth pastor or their children's pastor is telling them to do, right? I think selfishly, yes, that exists in our hearts, but the goal is for them to be obedient to God, right? And how do we continue to provide opportunities in church and at home for them to grow toward that faithfulness in Christ? So what do we mean by family ministry? At Rooted, when we talk about family ministry, this is our definition: churches equipping and empowering parents to spiritually invest in kids. Right? That's a very simplistic definition. I've got another longer definition for us, but family ministry is where parents are envisioned. They're being equipped to step into their God-given roles. Remember Deuteronomy 6:7. Remember Proverbs 22:6. Right? Remember Ephesians 6. That they are the primary disciples of their own children. Right? I'm not saying, however, that parents are the only disciplers of their children. Right? And neither am I saying that a church shouldn't have children or youth programming. Right? So I'm already tipping my hat to what I believe as a perspective on family ministry. There is a fantastic book, I think. It's a good exercise. The title of the book is Perspective on Family Ministries, 3 Views. Here's a cover of that if you want to take a picture of it. I do think it's a helpful resource. And in it, they kind of talk about 3 different models and perspectives on family ministry, right? Family integrated. What does that mean? Family integrated means it's kind of like we got to break these traditions of having youth ministry and children's ministry. It's just we're all one church, right? We don't see a model for this in Scripture for like children to go over to that part of the building and youth to go over. No, this is all, we're all one, right? And in your church context, depending on size, right, that might actually be a great option. Okay, that's one argument or one perspective. Another perspective is family-based, right? It still maintains what you might say age segregation, and that's for missional purpose, right? A 5-year-old child may not, likely won't be able to sit down and process the sermon, right? If your pastor or whoever is preaching is teaching on a text, let's say out of, I don't know, Ecclesiastes. I saw signs for an Ecclesiastes series here. That 5-year-old will likely have a hard time processing that, right? And then, because also the perspective of the teacher is not, catering the talk or contextualizing the talk rather for a 5-year-old child. They're contextualizing it for an adult mind and an adult understanding. Right? And so because missionally we might be missing those children or those students, we say, okay, well then let's have the children go over here and have the youth go over here. That's the family-based model. And then thirdly, what a lot of us, and I think in this room, would argue for and agree with is the family equipping model. And that's just to say that, yes, we do still have some age-specific ministry, but it's not meant to be a silo in and of itself. Instead, how do we have these age-specific ministries, but then really key into the parents or the caregivers of these children to continue on the work that we're doing 1, 2, maybe 3 hours on a weekend, right? That's really what we have. And if you're in student ministry, you've probably heard this, or maybe you've used this kind of line before, but you have 2 hours a week with your students, right? Versus the amount of time that they have with their friends, on social media, in the classroom, with their teachers, even with their parents, right? So we're fighting. And that I would always use that argument with our volunteers. Hey, we want you to come to these retreats and mission trips with us because in one weekend, you will get 36 hours. That's like 1 year's worth or a half a year's worth of time with your students, on this incredibly relationship-oriented experience. Okay, so again, if you have more questions, we can talk about that later, but good resource. All right, so what's the definition that they give? Long definition here. Don't take a picture yet, or maybe if you want to take a picture of it, you can, because I'm going to go through just kind of word by word some of the things that I want to draw attention to. I'll read it out loud. The process of intentionally and persistently realigning a congregation's proclamation and practices so that members develop diverse discipling relationships and parents are acknowledged, equipped, and held accountable as primary disciple makers, that's a typo, in their children's lives. Okay, so first point of emphasis, intentionally and persistently realigning, right? It's giving a head nod to mission creep's going to happen. Life is going to happen, and you're going to lose sight of being intentional and persistent with spiritual formation in the home. And this is, again, a message that we would want to communicate to our parents or the primary caregivers of our children. Because, again, we have them for maybe a couple of hours during a week. But where is spiritual formation going to happen? It happens not just in church. It happens beyond that, right? It takes constant reorientation. You guys may be familiar with this principle in geometry, right? If you have like even just a half degree of variance of two lines, right? Over time, over distance, that half degree becomes, the distance between those two endpoints becomes greater and greater and greater. So if you're not realigning yourself, you're going to find that you're way off of what your intended target is. Moving on. Proclamation and practices, right? This is the dreaded, do as I say, not as I do. It's kind of that principle, right? It's to say that we want parents to know what we're proclaiming, what we are saying, and we want them actually to do it. So for instance, if we want, let's use the example of scripture memory in the home, right? if I say from the pulpit to our congregation, hey, moms, dads, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, kids, hey, let's commit to memorizing, this Bible verse, right? And it's one thing for everyone to be like, nod yes. Yeah, that's a great idea, Pastor. And then they go home and they don't practice it, right? There's a disconnect, right? So again, what we're desiring is to see a constant working toward narrowing the gap between seeing the home as a place where spiritual formation isn't happening. Instead, we want spiritual formation to happen in the home. That's what we mean by family ministry. It's not that we're saying that we don't want youth pastors and children's pastors or directors and leaders to not have a part in spiritual formation. We absolutely believe that. I think we all believe that, but we want to partner with parents, right? It's one of our pillars here at Rooted. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Diverse discipling relationships. What do we mean by this? Or what do the authors mean by this? It just means not just mom and dad, not just youth pastor, youth leader, children's pastor, children's leader, or even volunteer. It's the variety of the people that are involved in the welfare and the care of that child, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, we would believe, right? And I'll just make this added note here. When we talk about discipleship, I don't want us to be satisfied with first and second generation disciples, meaning you yourself are discipling someone or training someone up. Like our goal, I believe, as Christians is to see, because this is why we're here today, the people that we disciple have discipled others, and those people have discipled more, and those people have discipled more, right? So a part of what we're hoping for with family ministry at Perimeter is that we're not just helping our current generation of parents be spiritual formers of their children in their homes, but we want that model to exist so that when their children grow up to have their own kids, that they're doing the same thing, right? And then that their children, when they have kids, are doing the same thing. It's this perpetuation of ministry, of spiritual formation, which we would call discipleship, okay? And then lastly, parents are acknowledged, equipped, and held accountable. And I think this is an area where I know I'm weak. We don't have a ton of spaces and intentional opportunities with our parents enough to acknowledge them and say, hey, we see how hard it is to be a parent. To acknowledge parents and say, hey, we are so thankful that you're here with us for this equipping, or you're here with us for this event, or you're here with us to worship on an ordinary Sunday, right? It's also to say, to take moments in the sermon, right? Even if you're in that series on Ecclesiastes, to make an illustration or two about parenting specifically and how it might apply in the home, right? And also holding them accountable. And this is a hard thing, right? If you've ever worked with a parent or you yourself are a parent and you've had someone say, hey, how come you're not doing this in your home? You're telling us to do it, but you're not doing it, right? It's that whole thing again about scripture memory, the illustration I gave before. If I say it from stage, but then I never mention it again, well, I've already told you or communicated how important I think scripture memory is in the home. If I really think it's important, you're going to hear it again and again and again and again, right? So this is why family ministry, I think a lot of times you will have this idea of doing family ministry, but then you will lose sight of doing it because it's tiring, it's exhausting, and it takes a lot of intentional work and effort.
One of the most alarming trends we're seeing in teenagers today is the prevalence of anxiety. If one of your children or a teenager you know is struggling with anxiety, we are thrilled to share a resource to help. Rooted's 2023 book release with PNR Publishing, Anxiety, Finding a Better Story. It's a 31-day devotional for teenagers written by mental health counselor and friend of Rooted, Liz Edrington. As a teenager, Liz felt overwhelmed by anxiety. Now that she's a mental health counselor, she wants to pass on what she's learned. Just understanding what anxiety is makes a big difference. But what makes an even bigger difference is understanding what God has to say about it. With daily scripture readings, breathing exercises, and additional mental health resources, this little book offers comfort and help for teenagers in the midst of their anxiety. We invite them to see how their anxiety fits into God's big story and to learn how Jesus can bring peace.
I think this is a helpful phrase that we use a lot at Perimeter, and in my context, is that we want to give our people a game to play, And I don't mean like give them a box of Monopoly, go play Monopoly. I mean a game to play. Like we want you to have buy-in, okay? Another way of saying it is we want our families to have agency. I don't want to do everything for our families. I don't want to do everything for our kids. As the youth leader or as the children's leader, I don't want to hand feed my children or even my volunteers everything, because that makes them dependent on who? Me, right? Not the Lord, and not say, hey, we have a part in this, right? We want to give them agency. That means you got to give them tools, you got to give them training, and you got to be incredibly patient, because this does not happen overnight, right? All right, so again, rooted 5 pillars. You know this, but just to reiterate: gospel centrality, theological depth, relational discipleship, partnering with parents, intergenerational integration. You apply this or seek to apply it only for student ministry. You can apply this in every context, I believe, in the life of spiritual formation in your respective churches. Okay, and what we're talking about here with family ministry, it's a lot of these things, if not all of them, but certainly focusing in on the areas of partnering with parents. I'm not sure if this slide is in the handout. I think it might not be, because this is coming from something that Rooted is working on right now. In fact, I see Andrew King back there. Together, we are family ministry mentors for the family ministry program, which I will talk about at the very end here. All right, so why family ministry? You've probably have heard us talk about this book. If you have not read this book or acquired this book, highly recommend it. Even if you're not a reader, just put it on your shelf, and at some point you're going to want to go back to it and say, oh, what is this book about? Okay, it is a very heavy sociological study. Okay, you got to get through a bunch of numbers, through a bunch of statistics. I do think it's also very specific to the Western American context, but I think that is, I can't say the vast majority of the world, but I think that's the context that most of us, if not all of us, are serving in. Lots of great quotes in this. Couple of them, real quick. Okay, myriad of studies show that beyond a doubt, the parents of American youth play the leading role in shaping the character and of their religious and spiritual lives, even well after. And that almost sounds contradictory, right, to our experience. Even well after they leave home, and often for the rest of their lives, this parental influence has not declined in effectiveness since the 1970s. Now, Christian Smith, he wasn't talking to just a handful of people at his church. I mean, this was a study that was done across thousands of households, I believe, right? And this is recent study as well. In fact, I had as an anecdote, I had a lunch meeting with one of my old discipleship students who's now late into his 20s, married and trying to start their own family. And we were talking about the role of his parents in his life today as a 20-something. And he was like, I am 100% way closer to my parents now than ever before. Right? The advice that my dad, right, Papa Wags, is way more pertinent, and I'm listening a whole lot more keenly than I ever did before, right? It's because of life experience, right? Another quote: all empirical data tells us that for intergenerational religious transmission today, listen to this, the key agents are parents, not clergy or other religious professionals. The key location is the home, not religious congregations. One reason is that most parents have much more access to and time spent with their children than any other people in socialization. Again, that might not be true for you. This is a general principle here, but I think we can all agree that the impact and the role that parents have in the lives of their children is still significant. And again, just from sheer time, right, the amount of time that they would spend with us as practitioners in the church or in our ministries is probably not equal anywhere close to the time that they would spend outside of our ministry in our churches, okay? How many of you guys read this report that came out from the U.S. Surgeon General within the last 2 or 3 months? If not, go read it. This is incredible because there's so much common grace stuff that shows up in here. This is Vivek Murphy, what's his name? Oh my gosh, I can't remember it now. Is it on there? The name of the author or the U.S. Surgeon, the current U.S. Surgeon General. I don't believe he's a believer. I could be wrong. But there are some things that they say in this report that are like screaming for Christians, we need the church. Parents need the church. Kids need the church. They need some kind of truth that exists outside of themselves. That's at least how I read it. One of the first things that's quoted in this work, raising children is sacred work and should matter to all of us. Again, this is not a religious work. This is the U.S. Surgeon General's report, an advisory report on the mental health and wellness of our parents. Okay? Again, broad study across the whole of the United States. And even if you're not in the United States, I think there are some, generally universal principles that come out into play. One more quote, because we could spend a whole seminar on this or workshop on this. 41% of parents say that most days they are so stressed they cannot function. And 48% that say that most days their stress is completely overwhelming compared to other adults. Right? I love I love stand-up comedy. One of my favorite comedians but in the last 10, 15 years, Jim Gaffigan. Right? And if you know about Jim Gaffigan, he's Catholic, and so he's got a lot of kids, right? And he talks about like the transition from going from like 6 kids to 7 kids, and he's like, just imagine like you're swimming in the ocean, right? And you're like trying to like keep your head above water. What is it like having 7 kids? Someone hands you a baby, right? That's what it feels like. Anything that like comedically, just to emphasize, it's hard work. 1 child is hard work. 2 children, 3 children, 4 children, 5 children, so on and so forth. Right? Raising children alone is challenging work, right? We believe it is sacred, yes. But then you compound that with maybe a health concern of the child or of the caregiver, the parent. What about the financial situation? What about the home situation, the living situation? There's so many different things, and they get into this in that study. So I'm going to put the picture of this one more time in case you missed it. I think it's just such a good thing. I hope as you read it and go through the report, you pray for your families and pray for your communities. And that's what I'm getting at now. So family ministry in your context. Okay. Again, I know that I'm coming from a skewed perspective of where I am currently. And so I want you to think about how to contextualize some of that information I just gave you. Think about it in the context of how old your church is. If you're in a church plant, right, and that's always exciting work, I believe, it might be easier then to weave in the concept of family ministry because you're getting in from the ground level, right? But if you're at an older established church, Joey and I were talking about this, right, especially if you're following someone that has established the ministry to what it is, it can be really hard to change it if you believe that you need to change it, right? If you're going from a very segregated church model in terms of age and stage, and you're wanting to implement family ministry, right? The battle is ahead of you, right? And sometimes your church age can influence that, right? Also, church size. I think the bigger you are, the more complex your organization is. I am at a very big church. It's a very complex organization, and it requires a lot of nimbleness, right? And it requires a lot of skill in communicating. Okay, also, think about your congregation, right? What kind of people are made up in your church, right? You might be at a church that's older. Maybe you have more grandparents in your home, and those grandparents are grieving over the fact that their children and their grandchildren are not at their church or don't go to church at all. I think that's a great opportunity to talk about family ministry, and more so to talk about the power of the gospel, right? And where their hope should lie, right? Maybe your church is much younger, right? And you've got a lot of growing families, like with a lot of young children who may not yet be in children's ministry programming or old enough to go to student ministry or youth ministry programming, okay? That has to come into play here. You have to think about how you're going to equip those parents just to get by as a new mom or a new dad or a mom and dad to a growing family with infants in the home. You remember those days, right? Operating with very little sleep, all right? Constantly worried about, what was that noise? Or what's that smell? What's going on over here? Those are things that people are learning to live out, and those are the people in your congregation. And then also, you got to think about your community and your city. My context is very suburban, very affluent, right? A lot of people, very well educated, white collar. And so the way that I have to engage those parents, it does look different than the way that I engage parents when I was at the Korean church, where a lot of them were more blue collar workers, right? A lot of families were choosing whether or not to come to church because they were wrestling with, do we open up the cleaners or do we open up the restaurant on Sunday morning, right? So you got to think about that context as well. You don't want to put a heavier load on the backs of your parents and your families if they already have a heavy load on there. We have to do that hard work of knowing our families. I've joked around, and I've said this multiple times throughout the last couple of days here as we're getting ready for the conference, that student ministry is parent ministry, and that's just church. And so I get it. We see and recognize the challenges that are involved in introducing family ministry. And that's why for the rest of our time, which is about 10 minutes, I want to talk about just team dynamics and your relationship with your senior pastor, with your board, your session, your elders, your deacons, whoever it is. Maybe you're in here as one solo person and you are part-time. Maybe you're not even getting paid. You're just there because you love the church and you love the ministry and you feel called to it. And you've got this senior pastor or this lead pastor that's just like, all right, help me with this, right? Patrick Lencioni has a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Again, this may not apply to your context. I think this is a helpful resource if you've ever had to work with other people, right? It really what all these like business type organizational leaders, what they always talk about is effectively emotional intelligence. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's just kind of like knowing yourself. It's kind of like learning how to read a room, right? Read a conversation, It's kind of like this idea of everyone, you show up in a room, everyone is wearing dark clothing and everyone's sad. You even hear people sniffing. Probably not the best time to start cracking jokes, right? Read the room. They're probably there because they're grieving something, right? So that's what I mean by emotional intelligence as an example. In the book, Lencioni talks about the factors of a dysfunctional team, and you kind of see like the biggest thing there is not having trust. Now, this might kind of poke into some of your situations here. And I recognize that. And again, I think a lot of what we want to do here at Rooted is to come alongside of you. We have mentorship programs, and even just at the conference, love to have a conversation with you about this. Talk to other people about this. We don't want you to wear the burden of the weight of ministry on your own. Rooted exists so that we can partner with you, right, and encourage you. But absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. Now, again, there may not be like a one-to-one correlation to family ministry, but I want you to hear from me that working together as a team, and not just with like your team, with your senior pastor or church staff, but even your volunteers, even as you're trying to connect with your parents, right, of your ministry, ask yourself, do I see an absence of trust here? And then ask yourself, well, do I want to get away from that? And hopefully the answer is yes. And then you have to ask yourself the next question. I call these the 3 diagnostic questions. This is not my idea. But you have to ask that third question, which is, what's the next step to get there? This is something that I took from Campus Outreach, which is a ministry, like a discipleship ministry to college campuses. But again, that first question, the first diagnostic question is, where do I want to go? The second diagnostic question is, where am I now? Maybe those two are flip-flopped. And then the third question is, what's the next step to take me closer to where I want to go, right? And I think if you're addressing any one of these issues or all of these issues, you got to break it down, boil it down to like one thing and go from there. Otherwise, you're going to be so overwhelmed and not know where to start. Okay? I know a lot of you guys were taking pictures of this. I'm sorry, I totally roped you in. This is what he argues for, is to have a cohesive team, right? And maybe, hopefully, you're encouraged and you see some of these things on here and you're like, yeah, I do have that, right? You want to transition from an absence of trust to a place of trust, from a fear of conflict to having healthy conflict. And that's just really saying, hey, we need to have a come to Jesus moment. Can we just talk about where we are? We're together on the same team. We're going after the same target, right? We may disagree on the maybe what that next step is, but we can agree that we're wanting to get to the same place, right? Commitment, accountability, results. Fantastic little resource there in 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Wading into youth ministry can be overwhelming. It's more overwhelming if you don't have someone to lean on and learn from. The Rooted Youth Ministry Mentorship Program was created for youth pastors in precisely this situation. The program is designed to provide both small group and individual coaching for youth ministers who are in their first 3 years of youth ministry, or youth ministers who are transitioning to a gospel-centered approach. This program is 1 year, wherein small groups of 4 to 6 youth ministers are led by one mentor in both a cohort and an individual setting through a carefully crafted 12-month curriculum designed to help you grow spiritually as an individual and as a youth minister. This comprehensive curriculum, designed by and for youth ministers, cover all facets of youth ministry, from Bible teaching, relational discipleship, equipping and training volunteers, missions, retreats, and crisis management. At the end of the program, we expect you'll be more proficient in teaching the Bible to students. You'll feel more comfortable partnering with parents, and you'll be better equipped to handle crisis situations, among other things. Additionally, when you complete the program, you'll receive a Rooted Youth Ministry certificate to affirm your commitment to join God in the work that He is doing in the lives of the students you serve.
I want to give you another tool here, and I hope that this is something that will help you stop for a second and assess your landscape. Okay, not just in terms of congregation, but just as you're trying to implement some of these family ministry ideas, it's important to know who the people are, the stakeholders, and the people who are holding you accountable, the people that you're accountable to, and even thinking about your kids, right, in your ministry. A lot of this is about change management, which again, really effective in my world when I'm coming from a big organization. But I think that this also helps, even in a one-on-one setting, to know where you're coming from, but then also the person that you're trying to lead or the people that you're trying to lead. This will make more sense as I go on, okay? So this is called the Ryan Change Style Assessment. Okay, very much in the business world. I don't have an MBA, but it does fascinate me. Things like change management, growth, having a growth mindset, those types of things I think there's so much applicability into ministry context. So they talk about 4 areas. All right, I'll give you all 4 of those. In fact, let me just give you all of these, so that way you can just take a picture. Change role, and the kind of the range or equilibrium there is: are you more of a leader or are you more of a follower in regards to the role of change? Okay, emotional expression. All right, are you a highly emotive person, right? You're going to feel deeply about it and you're going to say something about it, or are you kind of like, that's cool, whatever. You're just more laid back. Maybe that's you, right? Openness to change. This is a big one to really assess, especially when you're communicating up the organizational chart, right? How open is my senior pastor to some of these changes that I want to implement? Are they excited about it? Right? Yes, let's do it. I will send you to Rooted, get all the tools that you need, and come back, let's implement. That's great. That can be a very great person to have on your team. Maybe it's I don't know about that. You've probably heard this in some setting, even in church. That's not how we do things around here, right? That's okay. That's a cautious leader. Doesn't mean they're a bad leader necessarily, but that's a factor to think about. And then their orientation. Are they more task-oriented? Or are they more people-oriented? Are they more about hey, we just want to shepherd and care for people? Or are they more like, we got to do the work of the church? Are we evangelizing? Are we discipling? Do we have the programs? Do we have the Sunday service? Do we have all the stuff, right? We want to have a healthy, again, I'm not saying that any one of these things are on, if you're one spectrum of it, that's bad. But it's good for us to know the people that we're working with, especially, again, as we're leading up, right? So to even make it more kind of tangible, right, they put it into this matrix form. And I'll give you all four of the kind of the people, right? So if they're like a highly emotive person and they're like more of a leader, right? This might be some of you in this room. You're the collaborator. That's like, hey, I want to meet as many people as I can meet and work together toward this goal of having family ministry, right? Maybe your senior pastor fits in this role, right? Maybe your parent team, you've got people who are collaborating. Those are great people to have on your team because they have they're going to be like your evangelists, so to say, of family ministry. Identify those people. You want those people who are going to champion the cause. That way it's not always Bobby's idea, but it's our idea, our team's idea. You need to have people that are collaborators on your team. Maybe they're more follower types, right? They're the family that they've had like 4 kids come through the ministry already. Whoa, you're going to try and change some things? This always worked in the past. We've never done this before. They're oriented toward people. They've been at the church for a long time. Whoa, you're trying to burn something down they might feel that way. You're trying to burn this to the ground? No, it's worked. I've already had 3 kids come through the ministry. Why are you trying to change things now, right? They're coming from a place of protection, right? Key into that, know that about them. You need those people on your team too, right? What they're saying is, we believe in the work that's happening here, right? So how do you kind of lean into them a little bit, knowing how they're wired, and get them onto your side? Moving on, going to the bottom left there, tasks. They're task-oriented, not people-oriented, but they're very cautious toward change. They're just going to ask a ton of questions, right? Those are the types of people where they need to see that plan. Why do you want to implement family ministry in your church, in our church? Right? Where are you trying to take us? Well, I'm glad you asked me that question. Here's a document. This is what I want us to do, right? And it's not trying to start a new church. It's just saying we want parents to be more involved in the lives of their kids, in the spiritual formation of their kids. That's why we want to help our families do family worship, like family quiet time, family prayer time. Maybe it's to encourage our families to go on a family retreat, right, that the church may be offering. Maybe it's to participate in some kind of like church-wide program, right? Maybe it's to implement things like Bible memory or catechism in the home, right? We've never done this before. Why are we doing this all of a sudden now? It's like, well, because we care about our families. We want to equip these parents to fall into their God-given roles of being primary disciple makers of their children. Okay, and then obviously you can see what the last one is about. If they maybe have low emotional expression, but they're very excited, right? These are the people, again, similar to your collaborators. They're excited. They want to get out there and help you with this, right? We need to change anything and everything, and I'm really, use me to help you. They're like your street team, right? You get them out there to help promote what you're doing, right? And you might have a team full of these types of people. Your senior pastor, however, as you lead up, is probably one of these 4 things. And the more knowledge you have, right, and if you grew up in the 80s watching American television, right, especially G.I. Joe, right, now you know, and knowing is half the battle, okay? All right. A lot of what I've said is about building relationships, right? Know the people that you're working with, right? When was the last time, and this, again, might be kind of a soft spot for you, when was the last time you spent one-on-one time with your senior pastor? Maybe you feel like, no, I have no access to my senior pastor. Well, okay, here's a great objective for you when you go back home, or task for you, is just reach out and say, hey, I'd love to grab some time. I went to this conference, had some ideas come up, love to bounce these ideas off of you. Maybe you don't use bounce these ideas, but love for us to process together what I heard, and love to hear your feedback, Build relationships with them. Again, if if you don't have a relationship with your senior pastor, your senior leadership team, and you're trying to implement new things, if they're not bought in or they have no idea what you're talking about, guess where that idea is going to go? In one ear, out the other. They're not going to listen. It comes with relationship, right? Again, we know this when we talk to our kids or our students, right? If I try to tell them all this stuff without the relationship, guess where it's going to go? In one ear, out the other, right? If you're in a church that's got a board of elders or a session of elders, some kind of board or some kind of team that's overseeing the function of the church, you got to build a relationship with them. That can be an intimidating thing. I get it. Okay, but that's part of my own experience, was learning to overcome my fear of interacting with the leaders in my church, because I grew up in a very Korean, Asian mindset, right? I was given orders. I never suggested anything else of the people above me. Okay, but as I grew older, because I had kids in the church now, in the ministry, right, it behooves me as a parent, but then also as a church leader, to make sure we're all on the same page here. Okay? Building relationships also with your parents of your ministry, right? This takes a lot of time too. You got to create buy-in from your parents to get them on board with you about some of the family ministry ideas that you might have. And again, make it clear. Set your vision, set your targets. What we mean by family ministry right now at Perimeter looks like this. I want to take all the different age segregations, and I'm just trying to find the through line for it. And the best way that we've done that is by looking at milestones. So when you go from nursery into kindergarten, that's a big deal. When you go from elementary school to middle school, that's a big deal. When they go from middle school into high school, that's a big deal. When they go from high school into college, that's a big deal. So we've identified these mile markers. Other things that have kind of entered into that is helping our kids be able to come into church membership so that they can be participants in communion. That's, again, a unique thing of the Presbyterian Church, right? Find what those things are in your context that you can celebrate and use as mile markers to usher into the next thing. And then ask, how equipped are my parents for this transition in my child's life or their children's lives? Are they ready to go from no kids to having a kid? If not, then we got to focus on having some equipping there, right? Are they ready to have those conversations about what school am I going to send my child? Private school, public school, homeschool, right? That's a hard conversation, but guess what? You don't have to come up with all that information on your own. You probably already have people in your church who have made some of those decisions. Get them together, have a conversation. Hey, do you think it would be helpful to have a panel? Could each of you, kind of talk about your position? Things like that. So build your relationship with your parents. They're going to be some of your biggest stakeholders when it comes to family ministry. Also with your volunteers. This might be a big transition for your church. Your volunteers, whether they're college students, maybe they're upperclassmen even in high school, maybe they're parents, maybe they're older siblings, young adults, maybe even grandparents, okay? You got to tell them, hey, it's not all on you. And you may be coming from a situation where you've always felt that it's always been on me. This is making, I think, for my volunteers, when we do this at Perimeter, that we're making their jobs more streamlined, and they can focus on building relationships, that relational discipleship piece, okay? Because I'm saying you don't have to be responsible for everything. We want to help you by putting some of the discipleship component back in the home, right? But again, that's where we want to go. I got to assess where I am now. If we're not doing any of that stuff, then you just got to start with that one thing. Maybe it's a parent night. Maybe it is a joint, middle school and high school event. Maybe it is you say, well, we need to change how we're going to do volunteer recruiting. We got to change how we do volunteer training. Okay, figure out what that is in your context. Okay, and then also with your students, this might feel like a bit of a shock for them too. How come we're not having as much youth night? Well, how come we're not doing this lock-in anymore? I'm like, okay, well, no one likes lock-ins except for kids, right? All right. But this was so much fun. We used to do this all the time, right? I've heard that so many times in my years in student ministry. Why would you get rid of it? Well, never mind the fact that we've had 12 broken arms over the last 3 years. We're not going to do this event anymore. But that doesn't really lead us to where we want to go. And sometimes, because you can't do all the things, you have to say no to things that may have been successful in the past, because it's not helping you get to where you want to go. Does that make sense? All right, we're kind of up on time. Let me go to, here, I'm going to fast forward here. I already talked about like really honing in on the importance of organizing your thoughts. I wanted, if we had time, to go into this tool called RACI. Has anyone ever heard of RACI before? Again, it's great in a work environment, but if you think about it from a perspective of kind of like moving together as a team toward an objective or accomplishing a task or accomplishing an event, this is a great tool. Look it up online. There's videos about it. There are articles about RACI, okay? You're identifying people on your team. Who's going to be the responsible one? Who's in charge? Who's accountable? Who's the person that's actually going to like execute the event? Supporting. Who are the people that are there to like make it happen, but they're not the responsible ones, right? And then who do I need to talk to about this thing? A lot of times your senior pastor is going to be the consulted one, right? And or informed, okay? So you can take a picture of this. This is a crazy example of, let's say, at my church, Christ Community Church, right? I'm leading youth. I've got most of the responsibilities here, right? I'm accountable, I'm consulted on things, I'm responsible for a number of things, right? You can see that my senior pastor really doesn't have a ton of stuff that he's involved in, so, he's just consulted or informed, okay? But then you think about some of my volunteers or my parents that are involved in my ministry, right? I'm thinking about different ways to include them into work that I'm doing, especially if you're a solo person. This is, I think, very, very helpful for you to start thinking about how to delegate work. And that's a whole other workshop for sure, okay? Yeah. All right, in summary, and then we can go into questions here. It goes without saying, we got to pray. Right? This is a lot of work, and I'm sorry that I didn't emphasize that more starting off. We have to find ways to personalize this, what I just talked about. What I do, again, may not be what works for you. What you do may not work in my context, but figure out a way to personalize how family ministry needs to happen. Find natural bridges and connecting points to what already exists. You're not, I really do believe this, every situation, you're not creating brand new things. There are already pieces in play, unless you're in a church plant, right? Find those connecting points. Find the easy wins, right? You have a parent that's like, hey, Jimmy, I really want to help out. Well, if I'm the youth leader at that point, I should probably say, yes, I'd love to find a way for you to help out. Let's talk about that. Rather than say, you know what, I've got this, Joe. I can do it on my own. Right? Another month passes. Hey, I really want to take advantage of that enthusiasm, right? Find those bridges, find those connecting points, and then communicate and build relationships, right? One last page here with some resources. Hopefully this helps with some of the relational components of communicating family ministry. Humility is a great little book. There's one particular chapter in there about showing humility to your senior leaders. It's a hard chapter, but I think Gavin is so pastoral in it, fantastic. The tool that we use primarily at Perimeter for managing and supervising, because we got a lot of employees, a lot of teams, a lot of people, is Lead, Develop, Care. It's a book by Terry Cook. Very practical, very helpful. Lots of tools in the back of the book that have lots of tools and assessments for you to apply into your context, regardless of how large or small your organization is, okay? Their whole thing is around these qualities of leading people well, developing people well, caring for people well. And the author, Terry, is a believer. Gave you two specific examples of a podcast with Patrick Lencioni. You'll hear about that Ryan change assessment thing in there. Also, this whole idea of when to implement changes, because not everyone is open to change, right? You've heard the saying probably, the hardest thing to change is what? The thing that works. Why would you change something that works? Well, you change it because it's not according to your vision, right? Or you come to this new realization, oh, now we have to change it. Well, trying to convince people of what you're convinced of is a very challenging work. I think those two episodes there are super helpful for that. Two other things that I really didn't talk about, but I think maybe would be helpful in your context. I hope it is. They've been helpful for me. Non-Anxious Presence by Mark Sayers, and then The Minority Experience by Adrian Pay. If you're in a context where you yourself are a minority in a majority setting, which may not be everyone, that book I use. Adrian's a dear friend and brother. He was my coach as well. Such a good book if you are a minority person in a majority setting. If you manage or lead a minority person and you're in the majority setting, read that book, okay? So good, so powerful. It's written, I think, in 2018 or 19. He does talk about some things just naturally in the multi-ethnic, multicultural space. A lot of terms have been co-opted, right? So just read it with a careful eye.